Namaste, good evening, and welcome to Citti Media. My name is Sharan Setty, and I'll be your host for tonight. We organized for the first time a panel discussion on Citti Media last week. It's called the Vaishali Dialogues, and we received a tremendous response to it. Now, having received that kind of a response, we thought that we will continue to have these panels once in a while. And viewers, as you may be aware, we broke one of the biggest stories that set the agenda last week. There is another conference that is going to be held in the UK, which is on the same lines of dismantling global Hindutva. And in fact, it is getting a colloquial name of DGH 2.0. Now, this seems to be a continued colonial enterprise, the same old racist, the same old casteist narratives that is being played out in the media. And that is what we will be talking about, because the European Union has sanctioned a grant of 220,000 euros to this particular conference in the UK, which intends to talk about Periyar's role in global politics. Joining me today is Ranbir Singh from Hindu Human Rights UK, Rashmi Samant, Sarah Gates from Australia, and Prerna ji. Namaste, everybody. And first of all, to set the context, may I request Prerna ji to give an overview of what is happening? And first of all, is there such relevance that does Periyar have that kind of a relevance in global politics, Prerna ji?
Namaste. Thank you so much for having me. Namaste to all the esteemed panelists. In my personal opinion, I do not think Periyar deserves this kind of a grant or this sort of an attention, because in my opinion, if you go through all the activities that Periyar had done during his lifetime, none of it were actually beneficial to the Dalit community or to women. He is being championed as a feminist and as a savior of the Dalit community. And as a person who belongs to the Dalit community, and as a person who keenly studies, my subject of research is Dalit studies, and I have not come across any substantial data to prove that Periyar has done anything to help the downtrodden or specifically the SC/ST community, either in the south or in the north or anywhere, even Sri Lanka, if I may.
Right. Now, let me ask you a small follow-up. In that sense, why is Periyar still so relevant, at least in the context of Tamil Nadu politics?
Yes, he is relevant in Tamil Nadu politics today because the whole DMK or any of these sudden political parties depend on the now very much debunked Aryan invasion theory. Periyar, or as I would like to call him, EVR was a champion of the Aryan invasion theory. The whole politics in Tamil Nadu is based on the Aryan and Dravidian divide, on the linguistic divide between Tamil and Sanskrit, and particularly Hindi. They have a strong hatred for Hindi. So it is more of a separatist movement. It's not about social inclusion. It's not about upliftment of society. It's not about upliftment of women, downtrodden. It's a separatist movement.
Right.
And as we go into the discussion further, I would love to elaborate more on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ranbir ji. Let me come to you with this. Paji, we've seen these. We've had a conversation last week, and we addressed how there is an international consortium of academics coming together, the so-called South Asian departments coming together. And before we could begin this panel, we were also having a conversation on the same lines. And you've seen these kind of conferences happen over the years. What kind of a pattern do you see, and what are your comments on the upcoming conference?
Namaste, everyone. Thanks so much for having on the show. This pattern has been motivated. This narrative has been building up for a long time. Yeah, before the whole woke thing took off, actually, it was already in its all early stages. So I won't say infiltrated because I knew I was coming. I've been to a Caste Watch conference, ironically headed by a former RSS guy, and they claimed to be anti-caste. But when they found out Indian rights was there, they called us the opposition. And you had these, you think this stuff is bizarre? At this conference, they said because one guy was having open air cremation, they were going to legalize sati. There's no evidence for this rubbish. Yeah. At another conference done by the Catholic Church in the UK in 2008. A Catholic priest up and goes, oh, the caste system's worse than Nazism. Okay, so where are the gas chambers? Well, he would say that because his own church collaborated with Hitler, so obviously he wants to exonerate himself. When I put out against, in fact, it was actually a Buddhist convert who was saying India's got poverty and has got deprivation because of Hinduism. I said, give me one example of a Buddhist country that's achieved equality. Yeah, what, Myanmar with dictatorship, Sri Lanka, civil war. At that point, the same Catholic priest got up and said, let's stop petty point scoring. The point is you can't win against these people. They dominate the narrative and they got it all set. And it, like you said, it's a racist, colonialist view. Yeah,
Right.
Aryans invaded India, white skin, imposed caste system on darker people. And they're not only did they do that, but they were so scheming, they covered the whole thing up. So there's no evidence. The very people you mentioned Periyar, but let's face it, the main godfather of this whole thing, or claimed to be, is Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Yet Ambedkar actually denied the whole Aryan invasion theory. He said in his own books that Brahmins didn't create this whole thing. You know, other ideas have been stopped, like, for example, the idea that natives in America, Australia had no culture. They did. What the Aryan invasion theory is that colonialist hangover. In other places, this whole racist narrative has been challenged and stopped. You know, it's not taken that seriously anymore. But in India, it's been kept, ironically, under the guise of equality and anti-racism. Yet it itself is a very racist idea. You know, in fact, it's weird. You've got the far left and the extreme right come together in India, believing that people have got problems because of the caste system, except the extreme right support it and the left decry it. But they're actually in agreement, the whole basis of it.
Right. It's a very interesting argument that you bring up. And Rashmi Samant, what Ranbir ji is saying makes a lot of sense. And you've experienced this kind of racism firsthand at Oxford. And with DGH 1.0, what we saw is a very feeble sort of a very, it's probably the starting point of what we will see in the future as well, such sort of academics coming together. But the difference here is that in DGH 1.0, many of these universities who were supposed to be sponsors backed out after knowing that, you know, their names were used without their consent. But in UK, it seems to be different because an intergovernmental organization like the European Union funding 220,000 euros is something big, isn't it?
Thank you very much, first of all, for having me on the show. And I think I do agree with what's being said about these kind of conferences fueling racism. I think we recently saw a report by Dartmouth College about a student falsely accusing a professor of discrimination just because he was Hindu. And it was actually leveled at a group of professors because they were Hindu, and they were made to go through a witch hunt before the investigation finally revealed that there was no sense of truth to that entire allegation that was leveled against them. All of these conferences fuel and encourage the Hindutva bigot narrative, which is used against people who are in influential positions or within academia or anywhere. And it leads to a witch hunt until finally being disproved, at which point the Hindu person loses a lot of credibility.
Right.
Now, it's very concerning that the European Union has funded something of this kind, a conference of this kind, which has the potential to fuel more hatred in the already ongoing marathon of hatred against Hindus. It's concerning, but I think the sort of consortium of professors and academics who indulge in these Hinduphobic activities, they've learned the art of packaging their narrative in a different way. Now, I don't think they went with the whole dismantling global Hindutva proposal to the European Union, but with a different approach, which would sound very academic on the outset, but end up doing something which DGH1 did. we as a Hindu community, we're very well aware of these antiques because we've faced it for way too long now. And the moment, these things come up, we can tell where this is heading. But I think a lot of the unions or a lot of these funding organizations are either they don't know about it or they're indifferent to the whole Hindu situation, because we can already see with the Bangladeshi Hindu situation that a lot of the Western news outlets didn't pick it up straight off. So it could be indifference to the Hindu community that led to the European Union sponsoring it in the first place, or that the consortium did package it in a way that sounds very academic but ends up pushing a lot more agenda against Hindus.
Right. Thank you so much. Before coming to you, Saraji, I want to talk to Prerna ji. What Rashmi says is a very important point, because the way it is packaged is what is more concerning. It's almost a concerted effort for propaganda, because what the conference is titled is to be anti-caste, right? But was Periyar actually anti-caste? I mean, the writings do reflect that. The politics of today in Tamil Nadu do reflect that. But in reality, that's not the case.
That's very right, Sharanji. Not only was EVR casteist, he was not anti-caste per se. His whole ideology and his whole politics revolved around creating a caste divide within the Hindu community. And Periyar was a self-proclaimed atheist. So the Tamil word he used to use was kadavul illai. Kadavul illai means there is no God. However, if you see his writings or if you observe his actions, he was extremely anti-Hindu.
Right.
He has never uttered a single word against Islam or against Christianity. It was always the Hindu gods. Whether it was desecrating or breaking the vigrahas of the Hindu gods, or whether it was carrying around Sri Krishna and Sri Ramachandra's pictures and slippering them, it was always extremely anti-Hindu,
Right.
anti-Hindu. And he was extremely casteist as well. There are several examples to prove this.
Mm-hmm.
He was anti-Brahmin. He was anti-Brahmin, and that is very clear. We all know that he was anti-Brahmin, yes. But he was also anti-SC. He was also anti-Dalit. So he used to pitch the Brahmins against the Dalits. He used to pitch his own Tevar community against the rest of the community. He used to create differences between the OBC, between the UC and the SC. So this, right. and you can see this today, even today in Tamil Nadu politics.
Right. Saraji, what Prerna ji and Rashmi ji were actually telling makes a lot of sense, because when we follow the Vishal Ju, the story from Australia, he's been through an entire hangama there. He was called a bigot, he was called a Hindu fundamentalist and whatnot. And we were also having this conversation a few weeks before, where we were talking about certain academics in New Zealand and Australia who are trying to bring out this particular narrative that Hindutva fundamentalists are there, it's a reality, and that needs to be acknowledged. But a week later, you see that sort of a narrative translate into pro-Khalistani narrative, right? Now, what are the underpinnings you observe from Australia?
Well, when I hear about these events and I think about the formulaic sort of approach to, to understand one thinker in order to apply a particular framework over a particular problem that may not be valid or even relevant in terms of social justice in any given country. So who are they aiming at? Like, who do they want to solve problems for? In Australia, we had caste applied, obviously, in a different way here to Indigenous Australians. So caste has a meaning according to the colonial overlord, what they decide, what they determine And caste was used here to actually water down the authentic indigenous nature, like the authentic indigenous identity.
Right.
So as people became more diluted in their blood quantums, then
Right.
they would be deemed to be less indigenous. But what Indigenous people of Australia say in response to that is that you don't get to define who we are, and we will decide who is Indigenous. So there's different criteria as to who is an Indigenous Australian. And when I think about the ways in which social justice is being conducted, in this type of study, I read a proposal about the study on Periyar and how it was deemed to be a useful framework in order to understand caste in America.
Right.
And that was what the European Union had funded, 200 and something thousand euros to do. And I thought, wouldn't you be better off understanding, is there a caste problem in America first? Do some sociological research,
Right.
find out if there's a caste problem, find out whether Periyar is an adequate tool to apply as a lens into America. Ask yourself the question of why you need to use Periyar to begin with. Why not use, for example, Sri Abhinavagupta from Kashmir,
Yes.
who said that Varna is by nature, it's by your aptitudes, it's, you know, your qualities. It's not by birth. It's just a, you know, you can tell a Varna of a person by how they conduct themselves, the type of activities they're engaged in. Are you conducting intellectual work? Are you on the fight? Are you in the struggle? You know, are you doing business or are you doing cleaning? And I've done all of those things in my lifetime. It's not static and it's not fixed. We can move into different stages of life. And so making it a calcified thing like the British did, it really damaged the society because it stuck people into these groups that they could then fracture. So it was a tool of colonial oppression. To see that tool coming out again now, it's really quite shocking that they're actually trying to uphold caste in order to get rid of it. So to me, it's the wrong tool.
Right.
It's the wrong tool. They shouldn't be using it. And I think it's unethical. I don't think anybody should be picking out, you know, some very misunderstood concepts like the British concept of caste and then, you know, applying it in America today in 2021.
Right.
There's no known caste problem.
Yes.
In America. There's one case and it hasn't even finished going through the court system as far as I know. So why spend $200,000 to fix one case when America has got some of the worst hate crime statistics in the world? 7,000 hate crimes a year. You know, that's a lot.
The one more narrative that is being spun, Prerna ji, is that you see the most famous journalist in India posing for a picture with Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, and you see the placard of smashed Brahminical patriarchy, and you just find that really ridiculous. And in that sense, Brahminical patriarchy as a concept, I mean, that's another whole debate, but let's not get into that. But very few people actually talk about how anti-women Periyar was.
Yes. Periyar, if you actually can mention even one thing that he's done for the upliftment of women, there's not a single example that we can state that he has helped in the development of women or for the upliftment, if you may, whether it was widow remarriage. See, the Sharda Act, the Child Marriage Act, came in the 19th century. During way before EVR, we had, you know, several great leaders like Pillai Lokacharya, who abolished, you know, widows having to shave their heads. There are several texts way before Periyar in the Tamil language, but he never even ever acknowledged them, apart from saying that he is a champion for women's rights. Apart from verbally saying it, We don't see any substantial proof to say that he was a feminist or he's done anything towards the development of women. If you, whether you take Tamil Nadu or previously as it was, the Madras presidency, where several states like Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Andhra, he's not done anything for the women there.
Yes.
He's not. And there were several greats before him. I could name a few if you'd like. There was Pillai Lokamjia, there was Pillai Lokacharya, there was Bhagavad Ramanuja. There were so many women who were feminists of their time, during way before the 14th century, whether it was the Vijayanagara kings. They did so much for the development of women. But EVR, not even in one of his writings or speeches, ever acknowledged or mentioned any of these Tamil greats.
Right. It's a very interesting point that you bring up. And let me move this conversation towards Rashmi ji and then Ranbir ji. In India, there is a different kind of a political narrative that is playing out, especially after the BJP took power in 2014. But the reality is, the British education system, even today, has a neo-colonial lens at looking at India and Hindutva for that matter. Now, in your own experience, Rashmi, and you've studied in one of the best institutions in the world, how do they view India and how is their perception of caste? And of course, it's very skewed. So could you tell us more about this?
Well, I think that's a very interesting question. These are frequent conversations that I had with my peers over dinner and lunch. I think their view of India, Indian politics and religion is basically a BBC article or a New York Times article. And that's about it. And you can't blame them because they've never visited the country. They don't know the realities of how things go on, and they don't understand the local language or have access to any of the local papers here. So you can't blame them. But there is a very skewed picture about how the BJP politics is playing out in India. And that brings in a whole new colonial sort of narrative within it. I think it's all driven basically by what New York Times wants to portray India as. So basically a regressive country and a country wherein now religion is becoming more and more important, and we have a bigoted leader leading us into darkness. So that's more or less about how it's being seen. And there's also this growing narrative that there's very little minority rights currently in India, especially since 2014, whereas the population census clearly indicates otherwise. Right. Whereas for neighboring countries, it's a totally different, story, that the Hindu population has fallen drastically in all of the neighboring states, but in the neighboring countries, but it's never spoken about in any of the leading newspapers. But then when it comes to India, then there's this huge hullabaloo about how there's no minority rights, and this is what's carried around by people who don't know otherwise. So you can say it's ignorance, which is driven by the larger propaganda of bigger media outlets.
Right. Thank you so much for that, Rashmi. Ranbir, let me come to you with this question. Now, what Rashmi tells is a very interesting point, because had there been a blanket policy of racism, of Orientalism towards, say, former colonies of the British, then it should be equally applicable to, say, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and other countries. But it's only happening in the case of India. Do you think this is because India is growing as a regional power and eventually will become a superpower in a few decades?
Well, I think when India, and it will replace China as the main Western ally manufacturing hub, you'll see a different narrative. Now, going from what you said, and actually from what Rashmi said, a really important bit, she mentioned New York Times. The New York Times did an article about, I think sometime last year, about the treatment of Christians in the country. They're mostly from Dalit caste, backward caste, yeah? And it said why they treat so badly, and it blamed the Hindu caste system. In a 98% Muslim country, and which is an Islamic state, and which fund the Taliban, you're blaming the Hindu caste system. I mean, how many years is it going to get actually, if that's the problem? Like Hitler told Himmler, I believe it was a conversation, there was no such thing as Jewish people. They're against the Jewish spirit, yeah? So if you wipe all Jews out, the Jewish spirit remains. What you have is a whole narrative. It's got socialists, Marxists, yeah,
Yes.
Christian missionaries, Islamic missionaries, okay, all together. And I'll tell you why in a second. They want to wipe out Hinduism, believing it's a source of all the problems, yeah? If you wiped it out, do you reckon you'll get equality in India? We'll look at every country, you don't get equality in any country. The reason things change is to economic development, that's what you need, yeah?
Right.
You'll have people saying, oh, well, it could be wiped out, you've got the Hindu mindset. Remember what the Khmer Rouge did? They persecuted the Vietnamese minority in Cambodia. Of course, there weren't many left, so they persecute people who thought like Vietnamese. Now, that sort of stupid logic, you can blame anybody. So what you have is these going to come together with that kind of narrative. Understand secularism has Christian origins, yeah? What is secularism? It's the byproduct of the 30 Years' War. In 17th century Europe, that wiped out half of Germany. And Catholic and Protestant wiped each other out, yeah? And Ireland, that's still not over yet. But secularism was like a truce. Like, you know, we'll leave you alone, you leave us alone. That's where it came from. It's actually a Christian concept. When the British came to India, they thought, what do people believe in? So they used a Protestant framework, yeah, which defines religion as based on text. Everything religious is text. Everything else is culture. It's profane. It's custom, all the rest of it. Now, who do you ask? We'll ask the Brahmins. Well, obviously they follow the Vedas because they're for sacrifices, yajnas. But then at the local level, they'll have their own granthas, their own gurus, their own holy books. And you've got a population that was, on the whole, mostly illiterate, as in Europe, yeah? So
Right.
you've got that old framework of constructing this Hinduism, yeah, based on Vedas, based on caste, based on Citti, all these things, all packaged together. And that's what it's all about. It's not about this. In fact, in some ways, it resembles the Avonware. That was the Nazi think tank. Himmler set it up to research the origins of the Aryan race. They went to Tibet, they plastered us. They thought, is Atlantis under Antarctica? It sounds laughable because it is. But that's exactly what's happening now at this conference. You might as well send €1 million to fund the search for Loch Ness monsters and UFOs. You probably get more luck because Loch Ness monster exists.
Right. But you know, thank you so much for that. But on a serious note, Prerna ji, I come to you with this. What somebody would say is that, and I've read a few comments on when we broke the story, is that the relevance of Periyar may be limited to Tamil Nadu. So in some corner of UK, if somebody wants to do an academic conference, it is the prerogative of those who are funding it and those who are actually doing it. Why do you people actually have a problem with it? At the end of the day, it is A, academic freedom, and B, it doesn't really percolate into a global narrative. But is this... So I'll put the burden of proof on you, Prerna ji. Now, if this is about separatism from India and the entire Aryan Dravidian divide we were talking about, why do we have to worry about a conference that is happening in the UK?
We certainly have to worry about this conference that is happening in the UK, because this conference is not about Sri Guru Narayana, or this is not about Ramanuja. This is about EVR. And EVR is synonymous with anti-Hindu bigotry, hate.
Right.
He hated Hindus, Brahmins, Hindu gods, Hindu traditions, Hindu customs. So this is essentially another Hinduphobic dismantling Hindutva. This is just 2.0 when you have EVR over there. And when you're creating this sort of narrative in Europe or any part of the world, you're essentially targeting the Hindu majority.
Right.
It is an attack on each and every Hindu.
Yes.
Because that is what Periyar's teachings, even today, if you see anybody in Tamil Nadu, in fact, a really good book in Tamil by Sri M.A. Venkatesh, very clearly, it hasn't been translated into English yet. Nobody's had the guts yet. He's the BJP SC Morcha president right now.
Yes.
So he had written a wonderful book in Tamil regarding EVR and EVR's bigotry and his hate towards Hindus, Hindu traditions, customs, Hindu women particularly, and the Dalit community. So this is essentially anti-Hindu and anti-Dalit as well.
Yes.
A conference on Periyar is essentially anti-Hindu and anti-Dalit.
Right. Prerna ji, do you think this is also happening because Periyar in his own writings and in his own life has been pro-British on several occasions, and he's also sought Jinnah's help, to establish Dravidistan?
Yes, not only was he pro-British, he was very inspired by Robert Caldwell, the Christian missionary who had
Right.
come to India. Periyar was very inspired by him. So Periyar's ideology was shaped by the teachings of Robert Caldwell. So he was very much pro-British. He had written letters to the British and he had written letters to Jinnah to say that, Tamil Nadu should be separated from the rest of India. So essentially his whole ideology was just around separatism and Hindu hate.
So that's where it is coming from.
Yes.
Saraji, let me come to you with this question. Now, obviously, we've seen this pattern emerge time and again, and we've been discussing these events on a weekly basis almost. Now, this has been happening across 4 or 5 continents, right? First, it happened in America. Now we are seeing a bunch of events happening in Australia, now the UK. What can we do proactively in terms of spreading the truth about what Sanatana Dharma is, instead of not just opposing these kind of conferences?
I think we need to speak our hearts. I think we need to tell our stories. Rashmi's got a story. Ranbir's got a story. I'm sure all Hindus have stories about their experiences. And the best form of social justice, because I'm studying social justice, that's what I do, is dharmic ecology, dharmic social justice. And I've had to create my own frameworks to understand how what I know about Sanatana Dharma fits in terms of social justice and upliftment of humanity. The best social justice arises from the experience of the people on the ground. And so if we want change, we're not going to get it by writing academic papers. We're going to get it by speaking our experience. I've been witch hunted ever since I stood up and I asked for a reference from one of these DGH scholars. I've been hounded, and I see the same ideology that they're using on me, used recently in Kashmir, to isolate and target minorities and selectively kill them, which sent, a wave of potentially, another ethnic cleansing just before the Bangladeshi genocide. Now, this wasn't just people who were Hindu. This was somebody who was identified by terrorists as sympathizing with what they said, Hindutva. Now, this is terrorist language. This is what they're doing. They're singling out and targeting Hindus for thinking, as Ranbir pointed out, thinking like a Hindu, thinking like a Hindutva. What is it? I mean, they don't even have a definition for this thing. Some of them are saying it's not Hinduism. But really, when you look at their descriptions of what it is, I mean, somebody in New Zealand, he made his oath in Parliament in Sanskrit. He was hounded. He was hounded by these allegedly progressive Indians for having used what they regard as a supremacist text. And they say the same thing. If you wear an orange shawl with an Om on it, you don't know, you may be participating in supremacy. I mean, how far are they going to go? We've all got a gold star now.
Right.
So if we don't speak now and say this is morally wrong, this is corrupt, and this is genocidal ideology, it will go through, and it's even legitimated now. This is dangerous. We need to stop it. We need to speak.
Yes, it is a very distressing development. And Rashmi, let me ask you this. Sometimes I personally feel that the onus is on us too, because when we speak to civilizations outside of India or different people from different nationalities, you are a representative of Dharma, you are a representative of Bharat. And the idea of Bharat that I carry becomes the idea that they understand somehow. And one of the biggest institutions that influences Indian thought is Bollywood through its movies. And over the last 1 week alone, we've seen the kind of horrible advertisements coming out during Diwali And this is endorsed by the who's who of Bollywood, right? So should change begin at home?
Sharanji, I think at this point, Hindus have become a global population. We're everywhere. We're just not in India. So I think Hindus are citizens of the world now. So home is not necessarily India. But of course, India being home to one of the largest Hindu population must take decisive steps in the direction so that Hindus everywhere else can follow. But I think Hindus around the world have been doing a lot as well, that they don't need a template to follow at this point. Definitely, I think the whole thing with Bollywood, at least I feel, if you see who's been funding them, you can clearly, if you follow the money trail, you see where all the stories come from. So as long as, it's funded by, agencies outside the country and by elements which are not necessarily patriotic, it's bound to happen. And it's been happening for decades now. It's just that now we are more conscious about these things, and how narrative setting, this subtle narrative setting that happens through entertainment, has been eroding a lot of our rights and a lot of our situation in real life. We always thought, oh, it's just a movie, it's just something that's made up, or it's just fantasy. But indeed it's influenced a generation of people, their perceptions, and now we see the effect of it. Never too late, but I think it's good to see that Hindus are being more assertive of how they'd like to see themselves portrayed in stories or in the media, and hopefully it will lead to more positive change for the Hindu community and for advocacy in the future, both in India and abroad.
Right. Let's hope so too. And Ranbir ji, now since you're very close to where the conference is happening, what is the plan forward?
What is sorry, Shanji, I missed that last bit.
Since you're the one who's very close to where the conference is happening, what's the plan forward from now? Because the conference is still, I think, a week away, if I'm not mistaken.
These guys, look, I used to believe back in the day that if you have access to accurate information, you'll change your views, yeah? These guys aren't going to change. They're going to keep on blathering on with it. In some ways, it's no healthy joke. I mean, actually, HHR once organized a caste sort of meeting with the Dalit groups present. And this is quite interesting. So Dalit Solidarity Network turned up, 2 Danish guys, and at the end ran off, yeah? A guy from Johannesburg, from a Baptist church, tried to pin me down supporting caste. Didn't, so I never remember again. Now, one of the guys from Voice of Dalit International, I mentioned what Ambedkar wrote about caste, saying the Brahmins didn't do it, there's no alien invasion theory. His response was, I don't care what he said. I mean, the very person you keep pushing, you're ignoring him. But, give him credit, he invited me back to another meeting, but I was prepared this time. They always keep saying, caste in Vedas, Vedas preach caste. Okay, what's a free country? I'll use your scripture. So about a week before I went to a church meeting and they talked about in Samuel, the Lord did smite him. Basically, there's the Ark of the Covenant and somebody puts a hand on it. Because they're not a Cohenite or Levite, they shouldn't do that, so they get killed by the Lord Almighty himself. I thought, that's interesting, isn't it? So I brought that to the meeting saying, this is the Bible. I'm going to prove this book proves inequality. At which point, one of the Dalit guys goes, I'll put that away. I'll say, I'm not xenophobic, but I was born here. You came in on a student visa? And you're working packing chocolate or something? But that's irrelevant. The point is, why are you telling me what I can use? I can use what I want. He goes, oh no, we shouldn't have used Manu Smriti, we shouldn't attack Vedas, because you can attack all you want, it's a free country, but I can criticize this. And he went into a sulk mood. The point is, these guys are one-arm waiters. They can give, but they can't take, yeah? They can dish it out. When it comes back on them, then they want to stop it.
Right.
On a more serious note though, we know about the alien invasion theory. Do you know there's another theory called the Hamitic invasion of Africa? It's already known about because it's now discredited, but it remains. In Rwanda, in Central Africa, the Germans and the Belgians promote the idea that the Tutsis, the ruling caste, were Hamitic, lighter-skinned invaders over darker-skinned, Hutus.
Yes.
I mean, that happened in 1994, mass genocide of Tutsis. Yeah. That is where these ideas lead to. That is why they have to be tackled. And as Sarah said, academic papers play a part, but you need social activism. These guys are not for social justice. They're pushing a dogmatic narrative, and it's extremely dangerous. Right. It's just like fascism. It may not call itself that, but that's exactly what it is.
Right. Thank you so much for your comments. And I know that we are running out of time. So let me just ask for your closing comments. We'll begin with Prerna ji. What Ranbir ji said is a very important point to be noted, because this is somehow an attempt to divide the Hindu community and divide the civilization into different fabricated socio-political identities. In that sense, it is also very important that we know that Periyar was not just anti-Brahmin, but he was also critical of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, wasn't he?
Yes, he was critical of B.R. Ambedkar, and I just remembered what Saraji had said about Dr. Gaurav Sharma in New Zealand, who had taken his oath in Sanskrit and was hounded. So I was in New Zealand for about 7.5 years, and I know that he's like a second generation Kiwi Indian, and he's been facing flack. In fact, there's a very good article that was authored by him. I can share it with you guys in the link later. Coming back to EVR, EVR was anti Ambedkar. EVR, in fact, was such a proponent of Aryan invasion theory. Ambedkar had totally debunked it. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was not in favor of the Aryan invasion theory. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was the one who actually wanted reservation in place for the Dalit community to at least come on par with the regular society. And Periyar was against this. There's so much literature out there that proves that Periyar was anti-Hindu, anti-Dalit, and anti-women. So if people are spending, $200,000 on this person or euros and conducting conferences, I would see it essentially as an anti-India conference, as an anti-Hindu conference.
It's a very interesting point that you bring up, Prerna ji. Why was he against reservations? For those of our viewers who are not aware about it, please, could you enlighten us?
Okay, there is a very famous quote by EVR where he says that Islam is a religion that will actually integrate the Dalit community. So it's better that the Dalits convert to Islam. This is an actual quote by EVR. He promoted conversion of the oppressed Dalit community to Islam. Any religion but Hindu. And according to the constitution drafted under the leadership of Baba Saheb Ambedkar, anybody who converts from Hinduism, any Dalit who converts from Hinduism to any other religion, loses their SC status.
Right.
So you can see over here
what sort of enabled, yes.
Yeah, so their ideologies were completely apart.
Right.
Completely apart. One was for reservation. Baba Sahib was for reservation. Whereas Periyar said that it's better you convert to Islam. Convert to any other religion instead of staying Hindu.
Very interesting. I'm really glad that you brought that point up. Rashmi, you're back to Bharat now, and it must have been quite a journey in the UK. What, on a personal front, what was your learning during your duration there? And how do you think India can actually move forward, knowing the kind of neo-colonial attitudes that these people carry?
Well, I think my final learning was that Satyamev Jayate, that truth will always win, but with proactive measures. We just can't sit down and think that truth is going to come out one day and, keep bearing the misery of injustice in society. We need to fight back, but we shouldn't be insecure of the lack of resources or the lack of people. Literally, we have very few people on one side, and we're very few people with very little resources, but then a proactive attitude will get us through. This is something I saw from my personal journey, because at one point I was just one person, but then so many organizations and so many good, well-meaning people came to my aid, and we were able to finally put out the truth. So that, I think, is my learning. And I think this is something that every organization, every government, every country can emulate, especially India, that we need to start taking proactive steps. even if, currently China might be doing slightly better than India economically, much better than India economically, but, we need to take proactive steps. We don't have to wait until we are the economic superpower to take proactive steps. And that because we have truth on our side, we're going to sail through. So I think as a community, as people, we need to work towards justice, and the fact that Satyamev Jayate, and that's the core essence of our society. It will take our truth through, and the lack of resources will never be a problem.
That's a very beautiful message. Thank you for that. Saraji, your closing comments, but also what I draw from what Rashmi says is that soft power is also very important. So it is also important about how Indians and Indian culture is perceived abroad. Now, in that sense, China has not just grown economically, but they've even institutionalized this in different countries, including Australia. And in Australia, this has become a big problem with the Confucius Institutes. And slowly, I think they are closing them down, looking at the kind of nuisance it's causing to national security. So in that sense, what are your closing comments on this?
I would recommend that Australian security does a thorough investigation on the people in this country that are speaking this ideology to the public in the media, and the very few that we have here in academia, because we haven't had it sink down into our system yet. The very few who are writing articles in the media and academics who are conducting studies in this way, and their connections to foreign funding sources. We need to have a look at academic funding from any foreign sources, and make sure that we don't make the mistakes. See, when I listen to the ISKCON spokesperson, Radha Raman, yes, he said we should learn. We should learn. He said Hindus don't learn from their oppressors, right? The oppressors keep coming. They keep doing the same thing. And this DGH ideology is genocidal, but it's very, very predictable. It's a monolithic ideology. They all say the same thing. It's like another monoculture. They say the same thing, right? We need to learn and speak, and we need to get strong, physically strong. And that gives us a sense of confidence in our being. So yoga, use this yoga. It's soft power, right? But it's also, it's powerful empowerment for your own well-being, and learn how to fight for your human rights, and find out how you can get those human rights, because victims are always the ones that fight for their rights. The perpetrators aren't going to just suddenly give up their power and move over. You are going to have to, each of us who have been targeted and bullied and harassed, each of us have a responsibility for everyone to set the precedent. And no matter how hard it is, no matter how long the struggle, we have to be committed to that struggle, because by next generation, if we don't do it, our children are going to inherit what we didn't do. And that's what we've got now. We need to get the Kshatriya Dharma. We need to fight.
Yes, thank you so much. And it is indeed distressing when you see that a panel discussion with the Taliban's representatives is being allowed in Australia, but a conference that pervades positive attitudes about India will probably be criticized, and that's the reality that we face today, Ranbirji. When a member of parliament is stabbed to death in daylight, the mayor of London passes this off as a passing away and not a brutal murder.
Yes, I mean, but the thing is, there is grounds for opinion that's changing. People do understand, besides what the media says, yeah, when it's a use from a certain community attack someone else, when it's the Asian grooming gangs, they know exactly who they mean. Yeah, even though the media doesn't actually report it, it's a known fact on the ground. That's how attitudes are reflected. In terms of fighting against the narrative, I think we should Not only what Sarah said with yoga, because that's important soft power. It's not just soft power, it's actually physical power, as I'm sure you're aware. Remember Helen Suzman, for 13 years, the sole representative in the South African whites-only parliament that supported apartheid. She was the sole voice against it, and went saw Nelson Mandela in his cell on Robben Island. And when you ask these, let's say, anti-immigrant questions, they get upset. And what did Helen Suzman say about South Africa? She goes, it's not my questions that embarrass South Africa, it's your answers. Yeah. And I understand, look, you can't always persuade certain people. Pete Dolly both have said to Helen Suzman, I don't think you like me. She goes, what do you mean I don't like you? I can't stand you. Some people will not change, but the danger is not in these people, it's how influential that narrative is. That murder of the MP, David Amos, they're blaming social media. Social media only magnified what already existed. Those radicals, Al Majaroon, I actually went to them, recorded them years back and gave a tape to fellow Conservative MP who no longer stands there. This could have been tackled. They're looking at the wrong things. They don't want to attack the bogeyman, but they're going to have to. Sadly, this murderous MP won't be the last. There'll be more. And at some point, they'll have to take action and find out where the problem is. And the problem doesn't lie in a bunch of Brahmin Aryan supremacists in India imposing white supremacy by brown people, which is itself is a very stupid argument anyway. So we can leave that on a comedy streak.
Thank you so much, Ranbir ji. And I thank all of you for taking out your time today to join us. And the conference is going to happen a week from now. And hopefully all of us will be back to discuss the proceedings of the conference, because I'm sure it will be very interesting. Thank you so much, and namaste, and have a very good day. And thank you again for joining us.
Nothing.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.